Now, South Africa's journey through 30 years of democracy is what the Financial Mail describes as a tale of two halves, one of remarkable progress and one of setbacks. And as we reflect on what's meant to be an optimistic milestone, multiple challenges continue to weigh heavily on the country. Join me now to unpack the complex narrative of the dichotomy shaping South Africa's future is outgoing acting editor for Financial Mail, Natasha Marrian. Tash, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Nalu. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant, Tash. Maybe we should start off by just reflecting on these 30 years. There have been many high highs and many low lows.
There has never a dull moment in South Africa. But it's been, the beauty of Johnny Steinberg's piece in the FM this week is, it really takes you outside of the nitty gritty and the noise in our politics, in our business, in our economics, and really succinctly describes what has happened in South Africa over 30 years. I mean, Nalu, I was looking through our latest census, the 2022 version. Johnny in the piece quotes the 2011 one when he's referring to the golden era of South African democracy. But the 2022 one also shows how much development there actually was in South Africa. Some seriously progressive steps were made in transforming South Africa. 90% access to piped water and electricity. All of these really, really amazing milestones reached. But we know that there's deep challenges. And that's where we came up with this dichotomy of a tale of two countries, this very progressive transformation in some respects, and then 10 steps back, 20 steps back in other respects.
I must also ask you, Tash, maybe if we were to just reflect on, the post-1994 version of South Africa versus that pre-1994 version of South Africa. And maybe, as we take stock at 30 years, is it very possible that we didn't quite understand the complexities of merging this country, of not only trying to find a single identity, which I think we're still trying to work our way through, but also just, the sharing of resources, the sharing of ideas. And because 30 years feels like a big milestone, it's actually still very young of a democracy.
No, absolutely. It's still very young. And what's interesting is everybody's reflecting on this at the moment. A very interesting take was in the Financial Times this week, where this is something that's been going on in South Africa over the last 5 to 7 years. But, the breaking of the consensus around what former President Nelson Mandela did, and, saying that he sold out, a lot of the times we dismiss that narrative as part of the Bell Pottinger Gupta created narrative. But the Bell Pottinger, actually, the now defunct PR company, actually touched on a nerve that was already there. And Johnny Steinberg describes that really well in his piece, talking about how, the consensus immediately pre and post 1994 around sharing resources, around transformation, around equality, there's massive disillusionment with it, and going forward, the hopes and the dreams of 1994. I mean, he puts it so eloquently. It's I actually have to quote it. Mm-hmm. He says, South Africa has become a disenchanted place, and the dreams of 1994 are in deep and permanent retreat. Mm. I mean, I found that so profound, because that's the reality we see, and that's why we see the emergence of parties like the EFF, radical on the extreme left of the spectrum, calling for this radical reform. MK as well, they released their manifesto, and I mean that manifesto marks like a dramatic retreat from constitutionalism. So we are at an interesting point in our democracy, and it is young, and I don't think it's abnormal or wrong for us to be in this space. I think it'll only be good for South Africa to really reflect on all of these things as we try and move forward into the future.
And of course, as we try to move forward into that future, Natasha, I think a big thing that stands out for me here is then the kind of leader that this 30-year-old democracy possibly needs at this time, that will kind of, bring the ideas together, the people together. And I'm not saying similar to what Nelson Mandela did. I think that was a certain period in our democracy. I don't think we can duplicate it. So maybe somebody who's relevant to the times, but also who might be able to even appeal to the fact that, like you're saying, people are either moving further left or further right, and we do need this consensus here. So what kind of leaders are we possibly looking for here? Not only in a president, I guess, just in the people that we look up to as a society.
No, I think we're looking for people who can bring us together. The divisions, and in a more profound way than they did in 1994, I think, because we are quite fractious at the moment. We are pulling in all different directions at the moment. So I think, people who can bring us together and rebuilding. Johnny Steinberg in that piece talks about how the state has been eroded, and before we tackle any of the really serious and necessary questions that we need to tackle, we need to rebuild the state. We need to, all the people that got access to water and electricity in the first 15 years of our democracy need to be able to have that water coming out of the taps that were put in, need to have electricity. So we need to have leaders who can accelerate rebuilding the state, accelerate rebuilding ESCOM, accelerate rolling out renewable energy, accelerate the main deliverables, and then we can move forward and try and build a new consensus. But with the state in the condition it's in, mired in maladministration, corruption, dysfunction, incompetence, we're not going to get very far, especially at municipal level. Now, I can't stress that enough. Our cities and towns are in a terrible state.
Absolutely, Natasha. I think yesterday actually we had a conversation here on the show, and that showed that the municipalities are a big risk for South Africa. The political risk actually sits mostly in that environment. Before I let you go, Tash, I must also just ask you to help us really reflect on this election coming up. It's just a month, over a month coming up here. And what's also very interesting about our very young democracy is that for some people, they know exactly who they're going to vote for. They're going to vote for who they've always voted for. But then there's really this I'll call it maybe a bit of a missing middle in South Africa, where people just don't know. And I'm wondering if these options that we have, and we've got a lot of options, and also the emergence of all these smaller new parties, is that a reflection of a democracy that is advancing here? Where people are taking a stand and entering the political realm, raising their hands to be in charge of the change.
Nalu, it's very interesting. The two parties that have been backing against this trend of new parties, of potential coalitions, has been the two parties who benefited from our democratic dispensation thus far, the ANC and the DA. The coming in of new parties is not anything, it's not anomalous. Smaller parties are not mercenaries, as John Steenhuisen puts it. It's all, we are a multi-party democracy. It's in our constitution. One party dominance, as my favorite professor often says, Professor Stephen Friedman, is the anomaly. So I think we're moving into an era of multiple players, of coalition governments, and this election is going to really mark the start of that. Not necessarily at national level, but definitely at provincial level. We know that at least 3 provinces are at risk for the parties governing them: Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal for the ANC, and the DA for the Western Cape. So we are going into that era, and I mean, I don't think it's any cause for alarm. It is, we are actually progressing to where we should have been. 30 years ago. We are multi-party democracy, and this is actually what our founding fathers intended eventually. So yes, I think this election is going to be game-changing. It's also going to force our bigger parties into humbling themselves a little bit and less arrogance. We heard that recording, that NEC recording that was released of President Ramaphosa saying, the broadcasters should be airing what we've done and all sorts of things. And there's an arrogance in incumbency that, this election is really going to deal with. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Well, Tash, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and we'll keep chatting, I'm certain of it. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That was the outgoing acting editor for A Financial Mail, Natasha Marrian.